please, for the Pledge of Allegiance, and may I have a volunteer to do that for us? Sharon, would you like to do the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will begin with introductions, and we will begin on the right. And then also I would ask if anybody in the public would like to introduce themselves after we have done. I would appreciate it if you could do that for us. Michael.
Michael Huffey, Independent Living Resources, Contra Costa and Solano County.
Janet Vilbus, City of El Cerrito.
Debbie Toth, Rehabilitation Services of Northern California.
Josh Sullivan, Contra Costa DD Council.
Charlie Anderson with WestCat.
Sharon with Antioch Paratransit.
Kim Ridgway, AC Transit.
Hi. Vicky Wojciechowski, City of San Pablo.
Thank you.
Irene Ortega, CCTA.
Peter Engel, CCTA.
Members of the public, please, if you would like to stand at the microphone.
Marcel Delicato, Office of Emergency Services, out of the Sheriff's Office.
Thank you.
John Cunningham, Contra Costa County.
Good afternoon, Derek Shepard, Contra Costa County Office of Emergency Services.
Hello, my name is Margaret Rometti. I'm with the City of Concord and the Emergency Manager for our city.
Good afternoon, Catherine Girk, Richmond Fire, OES, Office of Emergency Services.
Thank you.
Leslie Young, Golden Rain Foundation, Rossmore, Transportation for Seniors.
Thank you. Let us proceed. Any public comment on issues that are not on today's agenda? Obviously, if you wish to speak on items later, we would do that at that time, but this is for items not on the agenda.
I'd just like to say I hope we don't have an emergency in the county because everybody that's important is here. Mr. Vice Chair, I did want to ask. I'm on. I need to be in another meeting at 2:25 today. I apologize for that. I've got something in the office at 2:30. So if we could move at the request of the council, item 7 up to earlier in the agenda, I can give that presentation. And then I think between you and Irene and most of the discussion today, I think is going to be about emergency services and how that's related to, most of the operators' clients, people that are homebound or have disabilities, and how they can get taken care of in case of an emergency. You all can have that discussion and hopefully a lot of ideas. And Irene will be taking good notes, and you can come up with where we want to go from there. And so I apologize for me having to leave early, but I just wanted to get that. Oh, and I also wanted to ask our guests if they're so inclined, there's a sign-in sheet in the back, and they can fill that out and give us their contact information in case we want to use them as resources in the future.
Okay, and we're going to still be with introductions. Lori?
Lori Reese Brown, City of Richmond.
Thank you. Now, public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to speak to an issue that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to the summary of actions. If you could just briefly, board members or committee members, look over that to see if everything is fine. Any concerns or questions regarding the summary? Being none, may I have a motion to accept them?
Motion to accept. I second.
Thank you, Lori. So that would be Kim and Lori. So maybe have a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any no or abstention?
I abstain. I was not present.
All right, Janet, thank you. Motion passes with no objection and one abstention. All right, so I am presuming that at Peter's request, we could move item 7. Is that okay with the committee? Up to, I guess that would be number 5. We'll just do that. Is that okay with the committee? Thank you. Peter, we are going to move 7 to under 4.
Okay, I just wanted to update the PCC on what's going on with the transportation expenditure plan. Staff is still working towards the development of a transportation expenditure plan at the request of our board. There was a period of time where we didn't think we were going to move forward with it, but the board has said, no, let's keep plugging along. We know the timeline's tight, but we want to get this done. So they're taking a little bit different approach. We have a new facilitator for the EPAC, which is the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee. Debbie Toth is on the EPAC, as well as Rita Xavier, that are both here on the PCC. They both represent seniors, disabled, and the PCC on the EPAC. So there is the first kind of revived EPAC committee meeting is this Wednesday, and they will be attending that. I think Debbie will be attending that. We're also, our board is getting more engaged in the process. They are going to start having 2 meetings a month. The first meeting will be after our planning committee meeting, committee meetings which occur on the first Wednesday of the month. So that's going to be the planning committee, and then the rest of the board is going to join the planning committee members for a special board meeting that just looks at expenditure plan items only. And then after our regular board meeting, which is the third Wednesday of the month, the board will convene as for the regular board meeting, and then adjourn and then reconvene for a special board meeting, again, just looking at TEP issues. So essentially twice a month, our board will be engaged on TEP issues to try and stay more in touch with the activities that are occurring with the EPAC and with public outreach and public comments and things like that. So I just wanted to update everybody. We're still on a tight schedule. I believe we will want to have a draft expenditure plan available to go out to the cities in the June timeframe, June, early July. If not late May, it's still kind of up, we're still shooting for those dates. Basically, we'd have to be at the Board of Supervisors for approval in late July, early August, and then on to the elections office for inclusion in the November ballot. So that's my update.
Any questions from committee members?
Peter, one of the things that came out in that process, that, well, at least from my perspective, is transit operators are sort of clamoring for perhaps potentially more focus in the TEP on paratransit service. Did you feeling any of that?
I guess I don't understand the question. You mean, is there interest in the board and the...
Did you get feedback from transit operators and others about that? Did the CCTA get feedback about that process?
The feedback that we got, basically, for the most part from the transit operators, wasn't specific to paratransit services, but it was included both paratransit and transit services, and that was the process where we asked the transit operators to go to their respective regional transportation planning committees and get put into their ask, and in some cases that worked, and in some cases it didn't work. Okay. So there's going to be a loop back around for the transit operators. We're looking at the idea of one of these special meetings, having transit come and speak to their needs and kind of how they see the process and how they see things might working at one of these special meetings. Kind of the purpose of the special meetings is so some of these different groups or some of the people that provide different programs or services or have policy-related issues have an opportunity to speak to the board directly and kind of talk some of those through, and then be able to answer questions directly from board members so that there's some direct communication going on there. Right now, what they're handling is a lot of policy issues related to the growth management program, and whether the growth management program, which is essentially the cities have to comply with the growth management program in order to get their return to source funds. And there's groups out there that want to see revisions to the growth management program, both on the side of making it more, tightening it up some, and some are saying no, it's fine the way it is. So they're, that's their early meetings, is kind of struggling or listening to both sides of that issue and finding some common ground there. So I think over the next 2 to 3 months, we expect these special meetings to last 2 to 3 months. So there would be opportunities for the paratransit side, mobility management, transit, and bicycles, complete streets, those types of programs, to come and speak directly to the board with their concepts and ideas to get more of that conversation going.
Any other committee members? Joshua?
Peter, do you have a particular date for one of the meetings that might be a good venue to suggest to our stakeholders to come in and voice their desire for more services in regards to paratransit and accessible transportation?
We don't have a specific date in mind at this time. We just haven't put a calendar together yet. So I know transit has, there's some meetings that some people can't make and some can't make, so we're trying to kind of go through some of those ideas. Maybe there are some conversations that can kind of be had outside the forum of staff being involved in them. I guess I'm kind of looking at Debbie, who represents EPAC, disabled senior services on EPAC, and maybe there's some discussions there that can take place about putting together that type of a thing. But I know that we're definitely looking for an opportunity to have that happen. Now, I will say, when it comes to accessible transportation, mostly paratransit and just transportation for seniors and people with disabilities in general, there's been lots of public outreach and there's been lots of public response, and I know that Debbie's helped with that and you've helped with that through the outreach. So the idea of services in general isn't an issue, I don't think. I mean, they're very aware of the need. Some ideas like mobility management and some of those concepts that our county has been moving towards for a long period of time may need a little bit more education to the board, because they're just not really aware of those. And then those can potentially get rolled in with just accessible transportation services in general when we have that discussion with the board.
Debbie?
And I will say that as soon as we know what the date is going to be for this special board meeting that would have paratransit and accessible services on the agenda, that the PCC would be notified. And also, just to clarify, that Rita is on the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee as a representative of the Paratransit Coordinating Council. I'm on the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee as the CEO of RSNC, representing the people that we serve in adult day healthcare, multipurpose senior services programs, skilled nursing facilities, etc. So we have some pretty robust representation. I would say that the landscape is very different and much more accommodating and acknowledging of the aging population, of people with disabilities, of the need for accessible services, and a focus on accessible services in the same way that we focus on non-accessible services, and that people with disabilities and who have aging-related issues and disabilities should have the same access to get from A to B as anybody else. And I think that it's sort of a different day where that's concerned. And certainly that we would ask that the PCC be notified if that comes up on the agenda, so the PCC folks would have an opportunity. And at that time, that an email would go out from you. I think probably something would go out from Rita talking about what her position is as a representative of the PCC. Fair?
Thank you. Item number 5, fiscal year 2016-17 Measure J Program 15 Claim, Schedule, and Subcommittee Appointment. That is an attachment, which will be at the very end of page 9. And who is going to be making the, okay, Peter.
I can make it. So this is our annual schedule of the allocation of Measure J Program 20 funding to the paratransit operators in the county. We just want to get this schedule out there, make sure we're all on the same page so we all know what the dates are. If you look at page 9 in the agenda, around the end of March is when we get kind of our quarterly payment from the state that includes the holiday retail, and it kind of gives us a better picture of where we think we're going to end where we're going to be at the end of the fiscal year, which gives us a better picture of what we think we're going to get in the next fiscal year, 2015-16. So we get that information and we put that into the claim packets that we have, and we send that out to all the operators, and then give the operators a few weeks to put all the information together and get that back to us. The important dates, I think, on here, May 16th, the PCC will see those packets and a recommendation from the subcommittee as to funding. And then in June, it goes to our planning committee and the authority board. So there's essentially 2 recommendations here, or 2 items that you need to take action on. One is approving the schedule, and the other is to put together the subcommittee that will review all these applications. Generally, it's a big party here at the authority. We sit down for 6 or 7 hours, and we go through these, and the authority buys the subcommittee lunch, and you'll get sandwiches from Specialties probably, and really good cookies. And then we interview a representative from each of the operators. We go over their claims, and if there's information missing we'd like to see or change, we let the operator know at that time, and then that committee then brings a recommendation forward to the authority. So as chair of the meeting, sir, you get to ask for volunteers to be on the committee, and as well take action on approving the schedule.
Well, let's deal with the action item first, but are there any questions? Yes, Lori.
I think I have one question. So the how is the committee decides how the funding is appropriated to each of the operators?
No, actually the expenditure plan
Yes.
designates the amount of funding that each of the operators gets.
Okay.
By percentage.
Oh, okay.
So the claim itself is, yes, we see this is the amount of money we're going to get. This is the budget. This is what we're going to use it for. This is what we expect. It's kind of a document that shows how you're going to be using the funds, how the service has been historically, how you see it in the future. And it's just kind of to make sure everybody's on track and understand each other's operations.
So how we see it in the future, could that carry some weight on whether or not the funding will be reduced or increased from in that next year?
The funding will be reduced. Well,
Could be reduced anyway.
I guess there's 2 areas where the funding could be reduced: a likely scenario and an unlikely scenario. The funding generally, if the sales tax goes up, the funding's going to go up. If the sales tax goes down, the funding's going to go down. It's directly tied to that.
Okay.
Now, if an agency is really goofing up, then there may be issues associated with, let's not give them their allocation until they get that fixed. But that generally
doesn't happen.
Usually within, a month or 2.
But
it has happened, but within a month or 2 it's gotten fixed.
So my last question, I hope, is that, if it goes up or down, that percentage is still the same.
The
Pretty
percentage
much.
is the same.
Okay.
The funding would go up or down based on
Availability.
the size of the pie.
Right. Availability. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Same thing. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, so the percentages, now, I should give the caveat, in West County, there's 4 of you, so there is a fixed percent, which was the guaranteed, and then there's this more, there's
that's
this more
based on
flexible.
population? Is that based on population
It's
and
based
size?
on, actually, it's based on the same percentages that were under Measure C.
Oh, okay.
Now, the percentages that were under Measure C were based on population and disabled community and income.
Okay.
So Measure J didn't go into that detail. Measure J said percentage is going to be the same as Measure C.
Okay. And my absolute last question is that, so some of these percentages is it also based on if you have a budget or you can identify other funding in your budget for, let's say, paratransit services, that amount that's awarded in the expenditure plan could possibly go down? I mean, because we're always looking for, as with San Pablo and El Cerrito, put y'all in there too, that we're always looking for additional funding to help support paratransit services. And so if you see that we have a budget, let's say, that has increased from revenue coming from another source, would that impact the percentage that we could get
No.
from? Okay, we just want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
All
The
right.
money you get from Measure J is the money that's in the expenditure plan.
Okay.
So any additional outside money you get is on top of that.
Okay. Great.
Presumably there would be special projects or programs tied to those other grant funding sources that you get.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Vicki, then Debbie.
Oh, I just had a question, whether operators could be on the subcommittee.
Yes.
Okay.
Because you're not really saying, you're not really competing for the funds. It's already established. You're just, and matter of fact, it's helpful to have operators on there because you can say, hey, we're doing it this way. And then when that person comes in, you can have that discussion and, share each other's ideas. It's actually a very good, for people that are new to the PCC, it's a very good way to learn about what the operators are doing and their different programs that they have and, how they've established their fares, for instance, or special programs that they do. So it's a good way to find out what's going on in the county.
So I was going to say that one of the benefits of being on that group is it's a learning opportunity. So you really get to learn how the different providers in the county provide service, how they measure, how they compare in on-time trips, how they compare in cost per trip, what their geographies look like, innovative ideas. We've had some really good brainstorming sessions at them. I will say that the city of San Pablo, we watched really improve their game tremendously year over year. So that's also another opportunity is to figure out how you can have efficiencies, partnerships, learn things, change things. We've reviewed and redone the process a couple of times and looking at how we do the smaller city-based providers as opposed to the larger regional transit providers. And it's just it's a really good learning and brainstorming opportunity, I would say. And it was really amazing to watch the growth that happened, holy tamale, in San Pablo.
Thank you. Any other? All right. I believe that a motion would be in order. Would someone care to make a motion to approve the schedule?
So moved.
Charles?
Second.
Tom? And for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Negative, say nay. Any abstentions? That's a unanimous.
So, Mr. Chairman, I just will add that I need to leave, but if you can take volunteers, usually 4,
Okay.
4 people works out great. I will be there, and Irene can get the names down, and then Marcel is here for the next item, and and the meeting's yours, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. And now comes for the great part, the selection of volunteers. I mean, the request for volunteers. I worked for a teachers union for 20 years. You never volunteered for the, you always, if you walked out for a minute to go to the bathroom, you suddenly were the chair of the committee. So may I have volunteers, please?
I'll do it.
Vicki?
Sorry.
Four. Michael?
I'll volunteer.
Thank you. Joshua? Somebody from this side of the table. It's overweighted here we have.
Well, so you have West County?
Well, West County doesn't have any members, does it? It has the, I noticed on the, yeah.
I'm just saying, you have a West County representative, you have developmental disabilities,
right.
you have Central County. Is that accurate, or you're all county?
All of Contra Costa and Salem.
Okay, well, for this purpose, it's all of Contra Costa. So East County seems to be sorely underrepresented on this committee somehow. I'm just saying.
It would be an excellent experience. I've done it before, so I've experienced the joy. Sharon, they're trying to encourage you. And the cookies are awesome. I mean, just incredible. And the company is going to be fantastic. So, Sharon, thank you. And I'd like, and I presume by consensus that we are approving the volunteers. Thank you. Moving forward, Marcel, who is Marcel? You are, like the comment was made about, we hope there's no emergency because all of the emergency people are here. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Item 6.
And I won't be asking for volunteers, not yet, anyway. I have my colleague Derek. He introduced himself earlier, and then a couple of city and fire Office of Emergency Services folks and our planning department here from the county. And basically what happened, I think, is last time I showed up at the meeting. That's kind of dangerous. And the topic of emergency planning came up. Because as emergency planners, this is one of the territories in transportation of those with disabilities and access and functional needs worries us and keeps us up at night. And so one of the things that Derek and I, when we were preparing for the meeting today and brainstorming, this is more or less just sort of an informational sharing back and forth of who has what, who knows what, and that sort of thing. So we have in our department a list of providers and points of contact. But my guess is sometimes that's some of you and sometimes that's not some of you. It's somebody else that does just emergency planning or has that as an adjunct duty. And one of the things that we're most curious about is the service providers who has emergency plans as it relates to transportation and evacuation. That would be one question because we have no idea. Because one of the other documents that we try to keep track of in our office is we have, in emergency planning, they have what they call about 18 emergency functions that we follow. And number one, happy to hear it's number one, is transportation. Because that's really going to be a real challenge, I think, in a disaster. And so we have this table for emergency function number one, transportation, where we track all of sort of the lead agencies, the support agencies, what kinds of groups are meeting and talking about transportation, and what plans and documents support those activities. And we would love to have some more input to this because I'm sure it's lean and mean compared to what's really going on out there. And also mutual aid is a big deal in emergency planning and disaster response. We're going to have to help each other out in cross jurisdictions when the poop hits the fan, so to speak. So have we thought about that? Are there memorandums of understanding between the different agencies about who's going to come to each other's aid? Because I know that Office of Emergency Services, and I'm pretty sure my colleagues would agree, we don't own the equipment, we don't boss the equipment around, we don't really have the staff. You all have that expertise, and that's why we need to partner and collaborate. And if you do have plans, have you ever exercised them or talked about them or brought people together? We call it sort of tabletop discussions where you bring all the partners and stakeholders together and kind of talk about the plan and talk it through. And then just to kind of get some clear understanding of expectations of what do you expect of the county, what do you expect of your local city jurisdictions, and back and forth. So sort of mutual expectations, if you will. So that's kind of was our brainstorming session this morning and getting ready for coming here this afternoon. So we're all ears, and you have lots of ears listening and lots of folks that can maybe answer questions if you have any. So does all that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank God I didn't ramble aimlessly. So floor is yours.
Lori.
Okay, so I see Kathy Girk in the audience, and she is the City of Richmond's Emergency Service Manager / Director, who does a fabulous job, if I may say. And not because I work for the city, but because over the years I've seen Kathy really reach out to department head, staff, managers, and really pull teams together and help prepare and have practice runs on how we would respond as a city to emergency services. So I don't know if you want to invite Kathy up to kind of have her, give her take on what her department does and what she's responsible for, how she really bring the city departments together on a regular basis to really go through practice sessions and to really think about, how we would respond in an emergency situation.
She's the one smiling back there. Is it being acknowledged?
Yeah. That's
You
her.
are welcome.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Kathy Girk, Richmond Fire OES, and thank you for those wonderful comments, Lori. Appreciate it. And I didn't pay her to say those things either. Yes. Yep. As a city, we're responsible for our emergency operations plan for all of our departments, our city staff, training, et cetera. So we do that on a monthly basis. We have meetings with all of our department heads, city manager. We have our disaster council meetings with our city manager, our mayor, and department heads. We continually do. It's a continuous improvement. So we do have plans, and we do reach out. Some of the things that we're working on now, and I'm very pleased to have Sam Casas with me. He's working light duty, and he's working on transportation plans. So I invited him to this meeting to see what was going on here too. And I know he's well aware of it. But he's working with me in the evacuation and transportation. So that's something that's one of the things that going forward in 2016 and 2017 that we will be improving is our transportation and evacuation plans. And we're working with AC Transit, WestCat, and everyone else. So I don't know, was there anything else you want to...
One of my questions is, can you give us an idea of how that, even though you're in the preliminary stages, of how that evacuation plan, how you're envisioning that looking?
Well,
with all the private transportation providers as well as paratransit services.
We have to work closely with all of those agencies, because we know that what we're looking at is probably a 33%, and that's maybe a low figure for people with disabilities and elderly and others with access and functional need within the city of Richmond. A population of 110,000, we've got a lot of people to take care of. So we have an evacuation plan currently, and that's being revised now with the help of county OES and the other cities too. We all work together on all of these plans and share our plans so that not only is Richmond planning to go this way, we want to make sure El Cerrito and San Pablo know that we're going this way, and so that they can go the same directions or work with us on that. So how it'll look is it's a lot of collaboration. Seriously, if we have to sit down and say, okay, is this going to work? And then we have a people with disability, elderly, and access and functional need work group, which Margaret Romini from Concord and I co-chair on that. Quarterly meetings and trying to find out what's best. What are we missing? What are the gaps in our emergency operations plan that we're not hitting for people with disability and the elderly and children? So there's a lot of work behind the scenes. I'm trying to think of what else would be helpful to you. But we just continuous improvement and continuous collaboration, not only with our city staff, with our department heads, with our mayors, our city council, but our neighboring cities, our jurisdiction, our communities at large. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you very much. Charles.
So at WestCat, we haven't put together our own plan, and I think that one of the reasons for that is that we're a resource that gets called on by whoever is in charge, and I think it's sort of a hard thing for us to know kind of how that whole delegation of authority and responsibility is handled in a crisis. So we have worked with, in tabletop exercises with our local police department, who has taken initiative, to put these things together and get us all in the same room talking. But if it's a larger county-wide situation, then who steps in and, who sets up the emergency operations center and who is, in charge of directing equipment. And I think that the other thing is that we know our own passengers and we maintain those lists and we kind of have a sense who might need assistance. But I think that there are people who, outside of our view in our communities, and so it speaks, I think, to the need to have a larger list of, in a crisis, in an emergency evacuation situation, here's everybody, we all put our heads together and put people on a list so that we can get to those places where the services are needed or the equipment's needed. So I think, so I think that we've sort of let ourselves off the hook in a certain way of saying we're not going to sit down and write a plan because we're not in charge of directing that plan when it comes down to it. And I think it would be helpful to have a discussion of how those decisions evolve in a crisis situation.
Thank you. Tom.
So you've been to our some of our tabletops, so I think you have some concept of what we do. We have an emergency plan. We have worked diligently to set up an EOC. The gist of it, as you know, Ann Hutchison is the best contact person because she's the one coordinating the whole development and barking at me all the time to give her more funds to do more exercises. But the gist of operations from our perspective has been that we would, if we get to the level of bringing up the EOC, we would look to the county level or the regional level for direction, and that we would provide any service we could. And particularly for the paratransit community, the ADA paratransit community anyway, we would, it would be very situational. That's how we would make decisions. We would expect direction, but the decision of how we would support would be situational because we have information on all of the individuals that are registered in our system as to what their needs might be. So I guess bottom line is we're saying we look to you guys for direction, and we're certainly all ears. In fact, I know Ann wants to have another tabletop soon. So,
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Mr. Hoppy.
Thank you. Like Tom was saying, we're basically, we deal with independent living and resource centered in Concord and Solano County. So we deal with people with significant physical disabilities, like Josh would be developmental disabilities. So we provide services for them aside from transportation. Basically, it's just education, transportation. But we have a vast consumer file of the disabilities and where these people are and the type of things that they would, with their disabilities, that could be valuable in this. And then vice versa, we would learn from you. So if that's something we could help you with, because we're sort of, I would say, experts on a lot of the disabilities, and we know what will consist of evacuating these people with disabilities. So, and then we do have all their information in our consumer files. So for entire Contra Costa County. So that's what we deal with every day. We meet face to face in our offices, and we provide them service with them, and then that way we see and hear them, and we know what's going on with them. But that would be the extent of our services. But I think you could use us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and likewise, we could use you too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, subject matter experts. We call them SMEs for short.
Yeah.
There's an acronym for everything in this field. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else with questions? Yes. Janet.
So, because I oversee transportation, I get to be the City of El Cerrito transportation expert, which I'm truly not. And so, the real truth is the main one you're going to take care of is your own community, first of all. But a big component of it is really knowing who else is your mutual aid, who else is out there that if you have this worst case event happening, who are the contact people that you can call to get support. And for me, that would be really great is if we had, who is it that you would really be calling in AC Transit if you needed backup, or East Bay Paratransit, if you needed some help through the county, who is the person you would talk to that could truly help you in that situation? And I know for us, Richmond and San Pablo and us, we all have mutual aid for each other. So it would, having our own couple vehicles, it would be us that would go out there, first of all, and try to help as many people as we could directly with that. But it's more about if something really major happened. How do we get a large bus in to haul 200 people out of a park,
Right.
which could happen, especially where we're located.
Right.
So that would help us the
Right.
most.
Which may or may not be passengers that you're accustomed to helping. That's what the whole mutual aid issue is about, is helping even those that, may not be your everyday customers. I can easily provide the point of contact list that I have, and we could vet the two, like maybe vet this list with your group with this list and come up with some additional secondary contacts or even maybe tertiary contacts. That would be a really good thing to do. And I think just to continue to have this conversation, I think might be helpful in maybe a different forum or maybe a little, I think Peter mentioned last month when we met, or the last time we met, that maybe a little subgroup. Sometimes you guys like to do little subgroups with some of these topics to kind of tackle them and brainstorm them through. And I think that we would be really open to that.
Thank you, Janet. I would like to make a comment. It may not be necessarily emergency contact. I don't represent an operator or anything, but I was kind of present at the shooting on the BART train because I was on the train across the platform. At the time, I was not aware of what was going on, but I was really impressed with how smoothly people were gotten out of, because I didn't find out what was going on until I was home watching the news that evening. How the trains moved out and then how they closed down the station and all that kind of stuff. That there are things in place already that you don't really realize until they're over with, that people were looking out for your benefit, that were looking out for your welfare. And like I said, I didn't know until I got home. I said, so that's why that police officer bolted off the train and did this and did that. And it certainly is appreciated. And looking at it, I'm not sure that's the kind of emergency you're talking about, but I think it's an example.
Well, you bring up a valid point. When we talk about disasters, it's all hazards in our mind. So there's no one that sort of ranks over another in terms of planning. For example, like Tom was mentioning, I've done a lot of work with Tri-Delta Transit because I'm the East County planner. That's kind of my primary customer base. And Derek, who's with me, is West County. And then we have a gentleman who does Central and South County. And Tri-Delta Transit was called on for the Antioch Water Park chemical exposure because we had hundreds of kids at the water park. and those that were sort of fine and needed to go elsewhere and their parents couldn't necessarily pick them up there. I mean, there was just, they were called on for a resource. And that's actually what drove our last tabletop, because I thought, that's a perfect tabletop to discuss, which is a real community event that happened that you were called on for one of your resources. And I thought it was a fabulous, fabulously done. Rather than make stuff up, we can just go with what we know happens in our community. Various fires that displace people, and that the Red Cross is helping out all the time and that sort of thing. So you bring up a valid point. It could be anything out of the blue at any season.
Anyone else? We have. Charlie, sorry about
Mike,
that.
I think this is, a really important discussion to have, and, that there are some things that can be done that we're not doing now, that we don't even know that we're not doing right now, that, we need to start doing. And I think that, kind of figuring out that there will be events and, this is the way this type of event generally rolls out, but here's some other directions it could take, and if it does that, then something else happens. And, just sort of modeling out for all of us that are involved on the ground and responding to something, how things happen. And I think, tabletops are good for that, but I think a discussion about, what are the critical factors that we need? Well, we need a list of people who, might not be able to get themselves out of their residence. How do we find that? Somebody needs to maintain that. Somebody needs to have access to it in an event so that we can get, the resources there. I mean, essentially, as operators, we respond. Somebody calls us up and says, hey, we have, this type of event. Can you get, all your fixed route buses out here or something? Yeah, we can do that. So, but, I think that there are other factors. I think when Michael was talking earlier about having everybody's health information, there are other concerns we ought to also be talking about, like HIPAA requirements or, things that we need to be aware of if the thing doesn't materialize and somebody gets mad at us for, disclosing information. It's probably something we wouldn't prioritize to be protected in those situations, but we probably need to start talking. So I think, there's room for us to kind of find out what the first priority things are, then what the next priority, and kind of work through it in that way of, we know we're going to be facing something. What are the first things we need in place, and do we have those things? I think it would be good to continue this.
Right. And I came from healthcare before I got into emergency planning, so I'm pretty familiar with HIPAA. And it does go out the door when it comes to life and death and saving somebody's life. So I know that gets brought up a lot, but I just think we need to reiterate that when it comes to life and death and getting people to a safer place, HIPAA's not really, nor are we really looking for all kinds of identifying information on people. We're just looking to move them and know what they need from us in order to move them safely. Yeah. So thank you.
Yes.
And I will say our situation is unique in that we have adult day health care programs congregate. So if we're in session and the emergency happens, we're going to be able to compile all the information on everybody we're serving, have their medications. I mean, we'll take it and go. But if it is 4:30 in the afternoon, they're not with us. But we still have access to all that information, and we have a vehicle. So as Charlie was saying, there are going to be, and we have 160 people that we serve in their homes, and we have people that we serve in skilled nursing. And, so we're going to have situationally different events depending on the time of day, depending on the point of the county, depending on, all of those things. And so I think that it would behoove us all to have some sort of separate, discussion about this and how we could activate, because even if it was on a Saturday, you could probably contact my driver and she would hop in the vehicle and go help, so
Right.
so knowing what your resources are and having them would be excellent.
Good
Thank you,
point.
Debbie.
And as far as we brought up evacuations and plans, right? I mean, so we have this nice little binder and this plan that sits on the shelf, but they always say the plan, doesn't survive first contact. I mean, when a disaster hits, the disaster doesn't say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to go to page 35 and check out that and tell me what I'm supposed to do. And as far as the evacuation plans and rally points and collection points and all that, the disaster is going to drive a lot of where we set those things up and how we make those decisions. So a lot of those decisions, like you have kind of alluded to, are sort of made on the fly as we're responding, because we can't perfectly neatly put everything in a binder. And so I'm big on like checklists, things to remember, things to think about, contact checklists, who to call, who to get notified, as opposed to big binders with plans. So even though this is a tiny one by our standards.
So can I ask one other question?
Well, I really appreciate your time.
So I have one,
Yeah, one more
question.
question,
So
Lori.
with that binder, I mean, like, and it's a nice binder, but how often do you actually practice and kind of rehearse and go through?
Depends
the
on
scenarios?
our exercise for the year. There are many exercises that have a sort of evacuation component out of them. We also have a community warning system in our notification system in our department, which that the whole evacuation things gets exercised depending on what disasters or emergencies they run up against, like gas, potential gas.
So are those
explosions.
exercises the same, or do you have different scenarios and things like that?
They
that you-
vary.
Okay.
They vary.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Year to year, and you can only exercises are very time intensive and resource driven. And we also say in emergency planning, to have one big hoopla exercise every year doesn't keep people's skills. It's a perishable skill. If we don't keep thinking of it and kind of keep it in the forefront of our minds and practice a little bit here, practice a little bit there, and kind of keep it rolling, it's kind of hard to to think we're going to be great at it in the time comes. So that's why we do a lot of tabletop discussions, pulling partners together, collaboration, that sort of
Because I would just
thing.
like to know how a scenario would look with having the transportation, but not being able to get that transportation to
Correct.
the appropriate, the appropriate persons.
Right.
Like, you like, for example, if you're landlocked or something because maybe something's going on in an emergency basis, and you have planned to get those vehicles from, let's say, the East Bay or San Pablo to Richmond, or Richmond to San Pablo, somewhere, and you just can't get there.
We do some of that planning on purpose in our scenarios when we build them. We'll take major arteries and major thoroughfares out of the equation. We'll blow them up, so to speak, so that it's not so neat and tidy, because it's not necessarily going to be that neat and tidy in any disaster. And I think that's something that if we end up pulling a small group together to continue this discussion, we can actually do a little scenario-based tabletop right in our little group once we feel like we've hammered out enough of these issues and elements to
So it's also the network of community support, like neighbor support, things like that, right?
Yep.
Okay, all right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Joshua?
Thank you for being here, Marcel.
Oh, sure.
I just wanted to throw in one last thing, and maybe you can add in a little bit, that I think that the value that this group can definitely add to the plan is helping Marcel get an idea of where the stuff is. So when we talk about, Debbie, you said, I have a driver, I have a bus. That's wonderful, but unless our OES department knows you have the bus, they're not going to know to request that from you. So I think that's where the main value in this can definitely be added in.
And even the city, even drilled down to the city jurisdiction in which those resources sit, is helpful for us to know. So, thank you.
Thank you, Joshua.
Just one other really quick thing. I would encourage that as the conversations continue to happen, that you all look at each other's emergency operations centers. BART, for instance, has an amazing emergency operations center, and we very much kind of stole from a lot of their ideas for East Bay Paratransit, but seeing what they've done in the past and how that helped us move toward our future for emergency planning really does help. And again, the emergency operation plan is kind of a living document. People's people change. Your resources are going to change. Their level of duties are going to change, and your inventory changes. So as those things happen, it's going to always be updating information, making sure that that information gets to the appropriate folks for keeping up your registries, for instance. But again, it's going to be living. It's constant conversations. But the more we learn about what each other are doing, the easier it's going to be for us to make sure that we're taking care of our own resources and our own inventory.
Thank you, Kim. Joshua, again?
Just one last question then, on piggybacking off of that. Would your department be willing to tour any providers on the command center and just structure, do like a crash course if you're
Oh,
interested
absolutely.
in updating?
Yeah,
So-
absolutely. I constantly say, come visit the EOC. We're not a big palace. We're not very fancy, but we get the job done. And it's just nice to walk through and see kind of who sits where and who does what and where do those resources come from. And so thank you for bringing that up, because it's really valuable that we go to each other's EOCs. And that sort of thing, and know who our contacts are. And you'll see that when I send the contact list out. I guess I send it to Peter, and you'll see right on there your main city contacts, your unincorporated area points of contact, your fire points of contact, your law. It'll all be on there. I'm going to send just the whole part, not just the transportation piece. I'm going to send all of it.
Tom?
For those who've not been through this or who are relatively new, thought I'd share something. I think I've been involved in this for about 8 or 10 years, and we actually have come a long way because of the exercise and the sharing of information. I remember one of the very first ones I went to that was a large tabletop for the region. The first hour or more was spent arguing between SFPD, BART PD, and the FBI of who would be in charge based on the scenario that was presented. It was eye-opening. You wouldn't find that happening today because we've gone through those and kind of sorted that all out, which is a good thing. Additionally, one of the things we've learned, and it's about sharing of information, because I've actually been involved in 2 real scenarios that involved us. And there's a perception sometimes by others that call for resources that's not realistic, because we have, as Debbie was talking about, having a vehicle. Well, we've got lots of vehicles, and depending on the time of day, though, they might be deployed elsewhere. Or sometimes, and one I specifically remember very well, because there was a bunch of agencies involved, and they wanted bus support in the East Bay. And the person that was in charge and calling for them was assuming like these buses would appear in 15 minutes. And you were talking about over at the West Oakland BART station, which we said we can send buses. And I think we said we could send 6. We could round up the drivers to get them there. But you were talking a couple hours before we could get 6 buses over there, not 15 minutes. But the person who was calling the shots that day seemed to not be cognizant. Maybe they just didn't know maps well. But by going through these exercises, everybody's starting to catch on what the limitations are as well as the possibilities. So, and I think that's what Marcella and her group are trying to do is coordinate those resources, at least for Contra Costa County. And that works really well as somebody has an understanding of what we're all capable of. And like I said, it even depends on the time of day. So,
Thank you. Oh, yes, Kim.
I'm sorry, just one other quick question for you. When you do, I guess, these kind of trainings, so to speak, do you also incorporate personal emergency preparedness? Because it's one thing.
Yes.
Okay.
We never get in front of an audience, except maybe today because it was very focused, where we don't make a pitch for individual and family preparedness. Yeah, because it starts with us, because then we won't be able to be available to those that need us if we can't be worried about Mom or Uncle John back at the house kind of thing. So, yep, we do. We always put a plug in for that. And we can do a whole session on that if that's what people want. But usually they want that and emergency talking points and what does OES do, what does the EOC do, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
The item number 8, which is out of order because we had to move 7 up, is Service Review Advisory Committee, and I do apologize. I have no idea who would be. Is that Kim?
I don't normally know who. I think Janet normally does it.
Oh, okay.
But just FYI, there was no meeting on January 5th. It was canceled. So the next meeting is Tuesday, March 1st.
Thank you. All right, let's move on. Item number 9, Bay Area Partnership Accessibility Committee. Who would be the person who would do that, since I'm not aware? Do you know offhand, Irene?
I think either Laura or Mallory normally does it.
And so they're not here to make
And
the
neither
report.
is here.
Not here. Okay. Item number 10, senior mobility action. Okay, good. Thank you.
Or Vicky
Debbie.
can do that, or Vicky can correct me. So we had our SMAC meeting this morning. I was only there for the first hour, so actually Vicky should probably report on the second hour. But we reviewed our third quarterly newsletter. We talked about much of what Peter talked about today in terms of updating folks on where we are with the sales tax measure, the expenditure plan advisory committee, and where we are as a body in terms of our messaging and advocacy efforts around accessible transportation. The group is anxiously awaiting more details on what happens at the expenditure plan advisory committee level so that they can activate and go to city council meetings and other groups that they're a part of to ensure that the message gets out and that we have enough representation spread throughout the county to make the case for appropriately funding accessible transportation for everyone. I don't know what happened at the second half.
I think, if I remember correctly, we discussed areas of where service gaps exist in all of the county, but specifically we talked about West County and how the committee or advisory council could help in bring up suggestions or ways to help everybody sort of fill those gaps. So we're just looking for work to do.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, then the next item would be future agenda items. I presume, Irene, you will.
I wasn't told of any. I don't believe there. I believe it's the usual. Let me see.
Michael, it's also a request if anyone wants to suggest some
Right.
from the.
Suggest something. So,
Okay, good.
And I see Ty back there. He might be able to fill us in a little bit. But in our area out here, this direction, we have the Monument Impact Shuttle Working Group. I think is the name of a group that's trying to get something going out in the. I think it's just right down the road from here. Maybe invite them to come in and speak and kind of explain what's going on. Ty, are you part of that group by chance, or?
I am part of that group, and they have just had 2 meetings. What the intention is to run a shuttle within the monument to serve that community, and especially people that are elderly with disability and low income.
Okay, definitely. Irene? And you just say in addition to the usual
Right.
reports and items.
Yeah, because usually I believe it's going to be most likely an update on the TEP as well.
Which is the Transportation Expenditure Plan.
Yes. And I'll let Peter know about the Monument Impact Shuttle Group.
And of course, we will celebrate the volunteers who have been appointed for the meeting because it'll be after that. Our next meeting is going to be on March 21st. So, any others? Suggestions for agenda items? Well, then let's move to news to share. Any news to share? I have an item, and I realize that it's after 3 o'clock, but this is an item that I'm very, very pleased to be able to report to the group. My parents live in Chico, and I have recently applied for and received disability access to transit because of some issues with my spine that make it difficult for me to walk more than 2 or 3 blocks without having to rest. And so I'm using paratransit where I think it's appropriate, even though I'm still mobile. And Tri-Delta Transit worked out. I was able to get to visit my parents in Chico completely on public transportation. Tri-Delta called the Butte County Department of Transportation, and I guess it's a national thing. And so they, 72 hours notice is what they require. And so I took the paratransit from my home to Amtrak in Martinez. I took Amtrak, both train and bus, to Chico. And then when I got to Chico, the Butte County, they call it the B line, their paratransit vehicle was waiting for me, and they also brought me back to the station a few days later, and then vice versa, and got back. And I just was completely impressed with how that works, because people do ask me, as the transit trainer at the Antioch Senior Center, what happens if you need to go from agency to agency? And that's exactly how it works. You need to give sufficient notice, depending on the agency, but your home agency is the one that makes the plans for you. You do have to pay the difference. In other words, like we have a special fare, at least up to this year, with Tri-Delta Transit, but the fare that I paid in Chico was their full fare, which was still very reasonable. I mean, considering what a taxi would cost, and certainly I always like to tell bus drivers, thank you, it's a long walk from the BART station home, because a lot of people compare public transportation and paratransit to driving a car, and I look back in the olden days that, you know, it's a long walk, so it's very much appreciated. The most difficult agenda item? Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. And well, that's right, these are announcements.
Real quick, sitting next to my left here is Emily Stevens. Was my assistant at
Congratulations. Cool. Cool.
So just for a question, do you know if they do, what we do is we help people with seniors and people who receive get disabilities find housing.
Mm-hmm.
And the housing prices out here in Paratransit County being so high, and people on SSI, we're shifting them or encouraging them to look at that outside surrounding counties. And a lot of them are going towards the Chico, Willows, this city center county area. So would you think that they would do like a round trip within a day for them? Because a lot of them can't get out there to view the places that we find for them on such short notice.
If this is a question to me as a transit trainer or just from my personal experience, I would have to say it's not something you could do in a day, because the trip is 4 to 4.5 hours each direction. I did it over a period, because I'm staying with my parents, obviously. But then again, I left fairly late in the day, and there are earlier trains, so I think that would be something that you would probably, I know that Tri-Delta begins their services pretty early in the morning, like 4:30, 5 o'clock, if not earlier. Yeah, and same thing with Butte County. Yeah, because they have commuter buses that, because they have to parallel and then they also, Butte County runs fairly late, so, as does Tri-Delta. So that would be a scheduling thing. It may be possible, yeah. Joshua?
I know we've had these conversations before with interagency transfer rides, but even for individuals that cannot ride Amtrak, you can go from one jurisdiction to the next. We've done it before in very large groups from here all the way down to Bakersfield and back. It just takes a really long time. So.
Kim?
So I think you pretty much answered the question. It really depends on if the individual can make that round trip, considering that it's 4 hours each way. But the service will begin, again, as early as the transit agency that's leaving, and can bring them back as late as the transit agency that's doing the return trip. So I would more look at the day and then the hours of each agency, and it probably could happen. But that's the best way to go about it.
And certainly on Sunday, where there's limited service, it would probably not be. But if it's Monday through Friday, you know, like I say, Tri-Delta starts early and Butte County operates late. So you just have to work it out with the Amtrak. That would be the quickest way to do that. But Joshua's right. There's also that interagencies between. Yeah. Are there any other? Okay, now the important, we have to vote on whether we're going to adjourn. May I have a may have a bunch of things being thrown at me to tell me that we want the meeting to end, or shall we just have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
It's consensus. Take care. Thank you. Our next meeting is March 21st at 2 o'clock.